Okay, so you know how everyone's always talking about getting over their fear of public speaking? Well, turns out we've been focusing on the wrong thing this whole time.
Oh yeah, I love when we talk about this stuff because like everyone's so convinced they just need to get over their fear. But
Right. And that's exactly what we're going to flip today because the article we're diving into from the English Mastery podcast today, it's called Overcome Public Speaking Anxiety. It's not about fear, it's about staying silent. And honestly, when I first read that title, I was like, "Wait, what?"
yeah, it's kind of brilliant actually because think about it. Most people are like, "Oh, I'm just so scared to speak," but the real problem isn't the fear itself, right? It's what the fear makes you do.
Exactly. And we're going to break down why staying silent is actually way more dangerous than feeling nervous. Plus, like, we've got some really practical strategies from this article that I think are going to help a lot of our listeners who are, learning English and trying to speak up at work or in meetings.
Totally. And we'll dig into some of the vocabulary too, because there are some really useful words in here, like anchor and assumption, that come up in professional settings all the time.
All right, so let's get into it. So, Emily, the article starts with this really interesting idea. It says most professionals don't avoid public speaking because they're weak. They avoid it because their brain whispers this very convincing lie.
Oh, I love that whisper is a convincing lie. What's the lie?
If I speak, I might mess up. So they stay quiet. They think it's the safe option.
But it's not, is it?
Not even close. The article says the real career damage comes from what fear makes you do, which is stay quiet when your voice is needed. And I think that's so true because, like, silence might feel professional in the moment, but
But it costs you, right? Because and here's the thing, when you don't speak up in a meeting, people don't know you're nervous. They just think maybe you don't have anything to contribute or you don't care or you know what I mean?
yeah, or like you agree with whatever's happening, even if you don't.
Exactly, exactly. And then someone else shares your idea and you're sitting there like, "That was mine."
That's the worst.
The worst. But the article makes this really good point about fear itself. It says fear is actually normal. Like that's not the problem.
Right. So instead of trying to delete the fear, you need to change your relationship with it. There's this metaphor in the article I really liked. It compares fear to a smoke alarm.
Oh, yeah, that one's good.
Yeah, so fear is like a smoke alarm. It makes noise, but it isn't always a real fire. Your job isn't to turn the alarm off forever. Your job is to keep moving while it's ringing.
I love that because it's like you're not trying to be fearless, you're just trying to act even when you feel the fear. And that's way more realistic, you know?
Totally. So let's talk about the strategies. The first one is what they call the small win strategy. And basically, you stop thinking of public speaking as one big performance.
Right, because that's overwhelming.
Exactly. Instead, you think of it as a series of small wins, like start with one sentence, one clear point, one question.
And if that feels too big, start even smaller. The article says you can read one paragraph aloud before your next meeting, then speak one sentence in the meeting. That's it.
Yeah, because confidence grows through evidence, not motivation. And I think that's such an important distinction because, like, you can't just wake up one day and decide to be confident.
No, you can't. You have to prove it to yourself bit by bit, you know? Like, oh, I spoke one sentence and nothing bad happened. Okay, maybe I can do two next time.
Right. And then there's this really practical tool called the one sentence anchor.
Okay, so what's that?
So before you speak, you write one sentence that you can say no matter what. Like, here's the main point I want to highlight. Or, from my side, the biggest risk is, or I have one question before we decide.
Oh, that's smart. So you've got something prepared that you know you can get out.
Yeah. And once you say that anchor sentence, your brain relaxes a little because you're no longer frozen, you're moving. And the article says movement is the enemy of panic.
Which is true, right? Like the worst feeling is when you're stuck and you can't get started. But once you start talking, it gets easier.
Exactly. So, let me ask you this. When do you tend to stay silent at work, even when you have an idea? Because that's one of the discussion questions from the article.
Honestly, I think it's when I'm not 100% sure my idea is fully formed, you know? Like, I'll have this thought, but it's still kind of messy in my head, and I'm like, maybe I should wait until I can articulate it better.
but then someone else says something similar and you're like,
Exactly. And I'm like, why didn't I just say it? But what about you?
for me, it's usually when there are people in the room who I think are like more senior or more knowledgeable. And I get in my head and I'm like, well, they probably already thought of this.
But they probably haven't.
Right. They probably haven't. So the next strategy in the article is about pauses.
Oh, yes. This one's really good for our listeners who are learning English.
Yeah, so most nervous speakers talk too fast because they want to escape the moment. But speed makes mistakes more likely and reduces clarity.
Totally. And here's the thing. If you're learning English, if you speak too fast, you're more likely to mess up your grammar or forget a word and then you panic even more.
Exactly. So the article says treat pauses like punctuation. Say a sentence, pause, let it land.
And it feels long to you, but to the audience, it feels confident. Like a calm pause signals, I'm in control, even if your heart is like doing cardio.
Yeah, even if you're dying inside.
Right. So let's talk about some of the vocabulary because there's some really useful words here, like anxiety.
Okay, so anxiety is a noun and it means strong nervousness or worry about something. Like she felt anxiety before the presentation, but she still spoke clearly.
And it's different from just being nervous, right? Like anxiety is more intense. It's that feeling where your thoughts are racing and you're really worried about what might happen.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's convincing, which is an adjective that means believable or able to make someone accept an idea.
So, like, the excuse sounded convincing, but the manager asked for proof. It's when something seems really believable, you know?
Right. And then whisper is interesting because it's a verb that means to speak very quietly, but it's also used for your thoughts. Like in the article it says your brain whispers that you'll fail.
I love that usage because it's so evocative, right? Like it's not yelling at you, it's just quietly undermining you.
Yeah, like a really unhelpful friend.
Exactly. Okay, so what about anchor? Because that's one we talked about.
So anchor is a noun and it means something that keeps you steady or stable. In the article, it's talking about that one prepared sentence that can be your anchor when you feel nervous.
Right, like an anchor on a boat keeps it from drifting away. Your sentence keeps you from drifting into panic.
Exactly. And then there's assumption, which is a belief you accept as true without checking. The article says when you don't ask a question, your team may walk forward with the wrong assumption.
Yeah, and that's so common in meetings, right? Like everyone assumes everyone else is on the same page, but nobody actually checked.
Right, right. So let's talk about the structure strategy because this is really practical.
Okay. So when your thoughts feel messy, your speaking will feel messy. The article gives a simple structure that you can follow.
Yeah, it's four parts: point, reason, example, next step.
So you start with one clear message, that's your point. Then you explain why it matters, that's your reason. Then you give a quick real life detail, that's your example. And then you say what you want people to do, that's your next step.
And the article says this structure gives your brain a path to follow. When you have a path, you're less likely to freeze.
Exactly, because you're not trying to figure out what to say in the moment. You already know the framework, you just fill it in.
So let me give you an example. Let's say I'm in a meeting and I want to suggest a new process. My point would be I think we should implement a weekly check in.
Okay,
My reason, because right now issues get discovered too late and it slows down our timeline.
good.
My example, last month we didn't catch that design error until the client review and it cost us an extra week.
Right?
And my next step, so I'd like to schedule a 15-minute stand up every Monday to catch these things earlier.
Perfect. See, that's so clear. You hit all four parts and it's easy to follow.
Yeah, and the article makes this point that like the best speakers aren't the ones with zero fear, they're the ones who speak anyway.
Right, because you're not trying to sound perfect, you're trying to sound useful.
Exactly. And I think that's the mindset shift, you know? Like if you focus on being useful and clear instead of flawless, the pressure comes down a lot.
Totally. So, what's one small win you could try this week in a meeting? That's another discussion question.
I think for me, it would be asking one clarifying question because I tend to just sit there and assume I understand, but
But sometimes you don't, and then later you're like, wait, what did they mean?
exactly. What about you?
I think I'd try the one sentence anchor. Like, prepare one sentence before the meeting and just commit to saying it.
That's good. And honestly, even if that's all you do, that's progress.
Right, because you're building evidence for yourself that you can do it.
So let's look at a couple more vocab words. Punctuation is a noun and it means symbols like commas and periods, but it's also used for speaking pauses.
Yeah, so the article says treat pauses like punctuation. It's a really nice metaphor because, just like you use commas and periods to organize written text, you use pauses to organize spoken text.
Right. And then there's clarity, which is the quality of being clear and easy to understand.
So, her clarity improved when she slowed down and used a simple structure. It's about how well people can understand you, you know?
Yeah. And then structure itself is a noun that means the organization of parts into a clear order, like the four-part structure we talked about.
Exactly. And the last one is freeze, which is a verb that means to stop moving or speaking because of fear or surprise.
Right, like he didn't freeze this time. He asked one question and kept going.
And that's the whole goal, right? To not freeze, to keep moving even when you're nervous.
Exactly. So let me ask you one more discussion question. How do you want others to describe your speaking style?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think I'd want them to say I'm clear and thoughtful. Like, I don't just talk to hear myself talk. I actually have something to say, you know?
Yeah, for me, I think I'd want them to say I'm engaging and easy to follow. Like, even if the topic is complex, I make it accessible.
That's good. And I think that comes back to that idea of being useful, right? Like, if you're focused on helping your audience understand, then you're already doing it right.
Exactly. So let's talk about how our listeners can actually use this because, it's one thing to hear these strategies, but it's another thing to apply them.
Right. So if you're listening to this and you want to start speaking up more at work or in meetings, here's what I'd suggest. Pick one strategy, just one.
Yeah, don't try to do everything at once.
Exactly. So maybe this week you try the one sentence anchor. Before your next meeting, write down one sentence you're committed to saying. Something simple like, I have a question about the timeline.
Right. And then just say it. That's your small win.
And next week, maybe you add a pause, like say your sentence, pause for 2 seconds, then continue. Just practice using that pause as punctuation.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth thinking about what topic makes you most nervous to present because that's one of the discussion questions.
Oh, yeah. For me, it's anything technical that I'm not 100% expert on. Like if I'm presenting to people who know more than me, I get really in my head about it.
Yeah, I get that. For me, it's probably anything where I'm giving feedback or criticism because I'm worried about how it'll land?
Right. But if you use that four-part structure, point, reason, example, next step, it actually makes it easier to give feedback because you're not just criticizing, you're explaining and offering a solution.
That's true. And I think that structure works for almost anything, like whether you're giving feedback, making a suggestion, asking a question. If you follow that pattern, you'll sound more confident.
Totally. So, if you could improve one speaking skill in 30 days, what would it be?
I think for me, it would be using pauses more effectively because I tend to rush through things and I know it makes it harder to follow.
Yeah, and for our listeners who are learning English, pauses are really valuable because they give you time to think about your next word or sentence.
Exactly. Like if you're searching for a word, instead of saying, you can just pause and it looks confident even though you're thinking.
Right. For me, I think I'd work on starting strong, like having that anchor sentence ready so I don't stumble in the first few seconds.
Yeah, because once you get started, it gets easier.
Exactly.
All right, so before we wrap up, we want to let you know about a really great resource.
Yeah, if you're enjoying the English Mastery podcast and you want more practical English tips for work and life, you should definitely sign up for the All About English Mastery newsletter.
It's totally free, and you'll get articles like the one we discussed today, plus vocabulary lists, discussion questions, all kinds of stuff to help you improve your English.
And it's all focused on real world situations like how to speak up in meetings, how to write professional emails, how to sound more confident.
So head over to allaboutenglishmastery.com and sign up. Seriously, it's one of the best ways to keep improving between podcast episodes.
Yeah, and we'd love to have you in the community.
All right, so let's do a quick recap. The main idea from today's article is that public speaking anxiety isn't really about fear, it's about what fear makes you do, which is stay silent.
Right. And the strategies we talked about are start with small wins, use the one sentence anchor, treat pauses like punctuation, and follow a simple structure.
Yeah, point, reason, example, next step. That's the structure that'll help you avoid freezing.
And remember, you're not trying to sound perfect, you're trying to sound useful and clear.
Exactly. And the best speakers aren't fearless, they're just the ones who speak anyway.
So, what's one small win you're going to try this week? Think about it, write it down, and then do it.
Yeah, and let us know how it goes. You can leave us a comment or send us a message.
All right, that's it for today's episode of the English Mastery Podcast. Thanks so much for listening.
Yeah, thanks for being here. We'll see you next time.
Bye.
Bye.